Hey you guys, welcome to Book Review 165. Today I will be reviewing Second Sons, Two Doctors and Their Amazing Quest to Restore Sight and Save Lives by David Oliver Relin. Okay, so this book is about two doctors, Dr. Tobin and Dr. Ruitt, that brought cheap ophthalmology, specifically having to do with cataract surgery, to Nepal and then expanding from there to other regions of the world, but starting in the Himalaya. Now, one thing that's true about medicine and holds true for ophthalmology, if I'm saying that correct, I believe I am, is that high-end clients in Western countries have, for the most part, access to the most cutting-edge medicine, and a lot of things that they have in like the third world have been eliminated or at least countered in Western countries very early or just completely eliminated. Cataracts being one of these things. Now, cataracts is when a white, sort of milky substance, I guess you call it, forms between the cornea and the eyeball itself, and essentially makes you go blind. At first, you just kind of, your vision kind of slowly goes, and then it eventually covers over where you can only see light and dark, and then it's just, in advanced cases, it's complete. And also in early cataracts, it's kind of like a filmy liquid, but then like as it gets more advanced, it calcifies, if I'm saying that term correctly, and you actually have like a hard thing that, just doing visuals here, covers the eye, and you can't see. Now, something that was very key to Ruitt and Tobin, is that they're able to perform the surgery cheaply. Now, Ruitt was really the one that revolutionized this. So, in the United States or in Western Europe or something like that, cataract surgery can normally take like an hour or a couple hours, and if you have health insurance, it's covered. But even so, most people can afford it. Now, when you're talking about subsistence farmers that make $1,000 a year in the foothills of Nepal, you're really talking about a group that just cannot afford that level. So what Ruitt really did is he refined his technique. And I'll tell a little bit about Ruitt's backstory in a little bit, until he was able to get the surgeries down to about, I think it's 12 minutes, 12 to 15 minutes, something like that, for just the basic cataract surgery. And essentially, he cut the eyeball all by hand, just with like just with a microscope, removed it, and then put in I think it's a IDE. That might not be the abbreviation. I should have marked it in my book, but it's essentially a artificial lens that takes the place of where the cataracts is, and is able to, the patients are able to adjust. I think the cataracts might be on part of the eye that's necessary, so you need an artificial lens in order to replace it so that the patient can see. Now, a little bit, and he essentially, he got that technique down to about 15 minutes and a cost of maybe like, I think the little plastic pieces were maybe like $20 or something like that. And then it would normally be the cost of seeing the doctor itself, but through grants and funds and things like that, the two were able to essentially provide thousands and thousands of these surgeries for free to people in the Himalaya region. Let's see what else. Oh, the name of the institute is, I think, the Himalayan Eye Institute. So its central headquarters is in Kathmandu. And when they were first starting out, Well, I'll go into a little bit of Ruet's history and also Tabin's history, and then we can kind of talk about the history of the clinic. So Ruet grew up in a poor farm in the northern Himalayas. He was Buddhist in a country that is majority Hindu, so he was a minority. There's still a lot of Buddhists in Nepal. When he was young, his dad contacted like a local shaman, if you will, to see what the boy's future would be. Now, the future could be that he would have just been a subsistence agriculturalist and not gone on to the great heights that he did. But by luck or whatever you want to call it, fate, gods, whatever it is, the shaman told that the boy needed to go to school, so they took like a 4-day hike when he was like 10 years old or something like that to a boarding school in Darjeeling, which is in India, a hill station in India. And Ruet did not go to the best schools, but he did excel at the schools that he went to the point where he was kind of taken on special studies by the teachers there, and eventually was able to go to the Ophthalmology Institute in New Delhi, which is for the subcontinent probably the best medical hospital in just the best university and the best medical university, both within the subcontinent of India and the various countries around there. The reason he chose ophthalmology was when he went back from Darjeeling. Like Darjeeling had a little bit higher standards, so maybe some people were getting like in the town were getting cataract surgery. But then when he went back to his hometown, it kind of dawned on him how basic the people were living there, and specifically how the cataracts really affected people's daily lives. Something that was very easy to treat by Western standards, but was just eliminating huge amounts of people out of the workforce, and also taking resources because of the caregivers that would have to be there. Something else is in the Himalayas, it's obviously very mountainous. There's a lot of ravines and mountains. And so if you're essentially going blind, you're essentially homebound. Excuse me. Where you're just a drain on resources. Like, not that people in like the plains of India who are blind would be that effective, but like you just have no shot when you're in the Himalayas. And the Himalayas being one of the, particularly rural Nepal, being one of the poorest areas of the subcontinent. This was really just devastating to communities. So Ruet got his degree, kind of went back to no. He did a fellowship in a couple different places. One was in Australia, in Melbourne, where he really got to see the best of the best medicine. But I don't remember. Oh, there's a famous. It's like Morgan or something. There's a famous, and it's really bad that I don't remember it. But oh, here you go. Maybe I'll be here. There was a famous ophthalmologist there that kind of helped Ruet along his way and really gave him inspiration for the social justice angle of medicine, because this doctor, whose name escapes me, was very big in Fred Hollows. There you go. The Hollows Institute. So Fred Hollows was another doctor, an ophthalmologist, and was very socially justice oriented, specifically having to do with Aboriginals in Australia, and how there was essentially a third world country within the first world country of Australia, that being the rural outback Aborigines, who did not have the same access to medicine that Western people did. And it wasn't just a matter of like distance, it was largely a matter of discrimination too, specifically with like treatable preventative care, things like that. So Ruet studied with Hollows, saw the best of Melbourne medicine, saw what social justice could do to change a society, and then went back to Nepal to establish the Himalayan Eye Institute. Yeah, I think that's the name of it. And so that's kind of where Tabin comes along now. Tabin was sort of like overlooked, whereas Ruet was a little bit more reserved, just in his personal nature. Tabin was aggressive, all things, all the time, and actually dropped out of medical school, I think, like 2 or 3 different times to go on high elevation mountain trekking partially in the Himalayas, but partially wherever. He has climbed Mount Everest. He was part of the first group to climb the, I think it's like Kashingung face, which was kind of a new route to Everest. He was one of the first people, along with like 4 or 5 others, to invent bungee jumping when he was at Yale. So just a completely kind of burn the candle at both ends kind of person. So kind of with those 2 personalities, they were able to start this Eye Institute. Now the one thing about Tabin is that he really burned a lot of bridges. So by the time that he came to the Himalayas, it was partially because he was socially justice oriented, partially because he liked the region from his climbing days, but partially because he just had problems finding work elsewhere because he just was not very, he was very smart, and when he put his mind to it, very diligent, as you saw later in his life, but Tabin was not necessarily the most focused in his younger life. Let's see. So, yeah, the Fred Hollows Institute gave some money to the Himalayan Institute. The other thing is that the U.S. ambassador to Nepal at that time period was very keen to help the Eye Institute. The United States, I think this is like in the like early 90s, was very keen to increase its aid to third world countries, and specifically to find programs that were low cost, high effectiveness, which essentially proved that to be the case. So therefore, USAID gave a lot of money to the Institute to start too. So there, it's just kind of there's a lot of specific details about the story growing, but it essentially just went like this and like this and like this and like this until they brought on more doctors. They started a branch in Bhutan that actually almost single-handedly turned around the eye care situation in the country. The king of Bhutan being very keen to help his people out, as things like gross national happiness, which obviously the ability to see is important, were affected, even though it was kind of a hermit kingdom. They started another institute down in the Ganges Plain area, the very thin strip of land between where the Himalayas start and the India-Nepal border. And I think they said that they wound up treating they saw like 200,000 cases. Tested, I guess you should say, through the technicians. And then treated something like 15,000 patients for various eye problems. As the institute got bigger, they were able to do things like cornea transplants, as well as other sort of more advanced techniques within the eye surgery profession. And kind of the book progresses through that. It talks about how Tabin eventually started moving into Africa, in Ethiopia and Rwanda, as kind of his 2 next choices, whereas Ruet kind of stayed more locally based in the Himalayas. I also got the impression, as they brought on more doctors, maybe the day-to-day grind wasn't quite there, though they certainly had days where they performed surgeries. But just like any kind of institution that grows, the figureheads have to spend a lot of time managing the whole thing. So they brought on more doctors, and were essentially just it's really sort of a miracle. And one of the things very much mentioned in the book was the process of the person has a cataract, to take the cataracts out within a day. They take the blindfold off, that protects the eyes for 24 hours or whatever it is. And then, what was I going to say? Oh, just the emotional reaction of the people when they can see again. It's sort of strange because not everyone's like that. Some people are just like, oh, I don't have my sight. But the probably overwhelming majority of them just think that he's a miracle. Matter of fact, the laying on of hands that you heard about like in the Bible or like I think exists among like religious figures was something that eventually Ruitt developed where when he would go into a city, but particularly when he would leave a city or town or village or wherever it is, people would come up to him and just want to touch his arms and his hands because of his ability to restore sight, seemingly miraculously, to the people of these poorer villages around Nepal and the Himalayas. Let's see what else. Oh yeah, he performed surgery on like the prince of the royal kingdom of Nepal. Can they talk about the Maoists? It's interesting because the Maoists in the West were seen as sort of anti-bad figures. They were the ones that led the revolution that moved Nepal from a monarchy to a democracy. And even though Ruitt didn't like a couple specific things having to do with the violence within the Maoist Nepal creed, he definitely had some sentimentality to their thought of like the small guy or the scrapper on the bottom, your everyday Nepalese, compared to sort of the power structures that be, because obviously he was fighting the same thing. Yeah, let's see. Ruitt and Tabin. Yeah, I'm just kind of going over some of the pictures here. I really should have done this. The book ends with them going back to after like 20 years, because Ruitt visited very early on in his career his hometown, but then and his parents had moved out of his hometown to come be in Kathmandu with him. But he eventually went back to his hometown to perform, for him, a very sentimental surgeries kind of in this remote region that he was from. And that's where the book kind of ends with them going on this long journey up this steep ravine and it being harder than what you thought. And it was very good because I think what David Oliver Relin was going for was sort of a metaphor for their careers of pushing on, pushing forward, and really against all odds, being able to make it to this place just like against all odds. Really being able to cure cataracts and blindness within the Himalayan region. On a little sad note, this book was 100% fact researched, but this David Oliver Relin also wrote 3 Cups of Tea with, I think his name was like Mortensen. He is also like Tabin, a high mountain climber from the Himalayas. Well, it turned out that Mortensen was running a lot of fraud for 3 Cups of Tea. Like a lot of what he said in it was false. And it really wasn't Relin's fault, but because of the essentially disgrace of his career and financial burden that was caused on by a lot of lawsuits and just across the board, Relin actually committed suicide in 2012, I believe. November 2012. So he left 3 Cups of Tea, which is still a good book, but has largely been discredited. But this, 100% fact checked, great book. Talks about 2 exceptional people within the Himalayan region. You guys should really check it out. It's inspirational. Okay. So Second Sons, 2 Doctors, and Their Amazing Request to Restore Sight and Save Lives by David Oliver Relin. All right, check it out. See you guys. Bye.